let's go through the process of succession from Module 7. So what is succession? Well, it's the kind of gradual change, isn't it, in the abiotic and biotic conditions in a habitat. Remember, abiotic is the non-living factors. They're going to gradually change. And biotic is the biotic or living factors, what lives there. That's going to gradually change. So you're going to see a change in both abiotic and biotic factors gradually over time, which I'm trying to show you here. Now, in primary succession, we start with bare rock or newly exposed land. And it has never been colonised before, so nothing has ever lived there or grown there. So there's no soil, it's just bare rock. It's incredibly harsh, hostile. Let's write that as well. Incredibly harsh, or it's a hostile environment. Okay, but we're going to get the first colonisers. We call them the pioneer species. I forgot the word then. The pioneer species. So they colonise the bare rock or the newly exposed land. Now, pioneer species is a word that for sure you're going to be using in any question to do with succession. It's the first species to grow. It's the pioneer species. Might be lichen, might be moss, because, you know, the seeds and spores can get blown by the wind. They land on the rock. They're adapted to grow in very harsh or hostile conditions with very few minerals and little water. So they're going to be the first species that are able to grow. But the conditions start to change. So we can then say things like conditions become less harsh or less hostile. Because what's going to happen is the lichen and moss is going to die eventually, right? And it's going to start to decompose. And when the lichen and moss starts to decompose, it's going to add a very thin layer of basic soil. And that thin layer of basic soil will contain some minerals, and it will be able to retain a little bit of water. So the conditions are becoming less harsh, less hostile, because you've now got a basic soil, you've got some minerals, and you've got maybe some water retention. So we're changing the abiotic conditions. The pioneer species changed the abiotic conditions for us because it dies and decomposes. It gives us some soil, some minerals, some water. The conditions become less harsh or hostile. So now small plants can grow, grasses can grow. Maybe their seeds get blown in by the wind, maybe via some kind of animal feces that have eaten the seeds and carried it to that area. But small plants and grasses start to grow. And again, they're going to die, they're going to decompose, and they're going to add to that layer of soil. The soil is going to get thicker. It's going to contain more minerals. It's going to be able to retain more water. So I go back to the same point. I'm not going to write it again, but the conditions are gradually becoming less harsh, less hostile. We're getting basic soil increasing in depth. It's increasing in mineral concentration. It's increasing in its ability to retain water. So more and more species are going to be able to survive in that habitat, which was once just bare rock. Now we can kind of summarise this by saying new species begin to grow as the environment becomes less harsh, less hostile. They're going to outcompete the previous species. So once the kind of bigger shrubs and larger plants start to grow, they're probably going to outcompete the smaller plants and the grasses. But eventually, you know, once you get your large plants and shrubs, again, they're going to decompose, they're going to add to the soil. It's going to get even less hostile. We're going to get more water retention, more minerals. Then there's enough soil with enough water and minerals to support trees. Small trees, then large trees. And in the UK, our climax community is a woodland, right, with large trees. So you then get what we call the dominant species will be most abundant. So for us in the UK, this is large trees. and a climax community will be reached. And I'm going to underline that word climax community because that's super important. So I would say in your answers, start with the pioneer species. They colonised first. Then do a description of how the pioneer species and the subsequent species are going to change the abiotic conditions or make them less harsh or less hostile. Then convey the idea that as new species kind of move in and grow, they're likely going to outcompete the previous species. And then reach the point where you get to a dominant species in that habitat. We describe the final population as the climax community. And I just want to say a couple of extra things about this climax community. By the time we reach the climax community, it's pretty stable. So there's going to be very little change in the community from that point on. Also, by the time we reach the climax community, as we've gone through this story, if you like, we've increased the biodiversity, and we've also increased the biomass because we've now got lots of trees and large trees which are with a much greater biomass than we had at the start, right? With just our lichens, moss and small plants. So we're increasing biomass and diversity. That means our climax community will be the most stable stage of all these stages. It will have the greatest biomass and probably the greatest biodiversity too. And that's it. Succession, the series of steps that shows how a habitat changes over time in terms of the abiotic and the biotic conditions.